among the most important institutions of our lives are the political institutions, how government is constituted, how we conduct a common public life. And of course, politics is also one of the most contested areas. What's good government? What's bad government? How should government be organized? These are some of the very deep questions that we will need to address in order to understand the ages of globalization and to fashion political institutions for our day. The core reason for politics is we don't live alone, and we can't thrive alone. We can't even survive alone. We can only survive and thrive as part of a larger group. And within that group, we can't make our own individual decisions on many things because we need common standards. We need common shared practices. We need ways to enforce rules so that we don't kill each other or do damage to each other or steal each other's property. We need judicial codes and processes, laws that govern our own interaction. And of course, in politics, we need ways that our polis or political community, whether it is a city or a nation, interacts with other political communities in what we today call international relations. We need, when we think about political institutions, to think about the things that we need to do together, the things where we have a common need and a common purpose. And in the jargon of economics, we often call these the public goods. Public goods are the kinds of activities that need to be undertaken collectively so that we as a group can thrive and even survive collectively. One obvious public good for a community is defense against other communities, and finding ways to be safe at a community level. This is not feasible for each of us to have our own individual defense. That would be doomed to fail if we tried to be our own individual army or our own individual defense. Cities from ancient times have built walls collectively or have built the systems inside the settlements, the roads, the water storage, the cisterns, the ways for a city to be safe from others, safe from climate shocks, safe from drought, safe from floods, and so forth. So public goods is the broad category that defines the areas where we have to agree to agree. We have to get along. And of course, within society, there are differences of interest and differences of opinion, and there are those who would like the others to pay the bill, but would like to shirk their own responsibility, or what we say would like to free ride on taxes or labor effort put in by others. And because of these differences of interest, differences of viewpoint, and ever-present risks of free riding, groups have to make common rules, and they have to have the power to enforce them. And therein lies the origin of political institutions. Political institutions need to provide for a common defense. They need to be able to provision for justice. They need to be able to have some measure of distribution of goods and services, lest the inequalities between the wealthy and the impoverished become so wide that some people are reveling while others are starving to death, need to be addressed and solved. And of course, collective action is needed for the infrastructure, such as the networks of roads or water and sanitation systems or public health measures to protect against epidemics or other public health hazards, and to regulate the use of dangerous substances, for example, pollutants that could endanger the community if not properly regulated. In order to meet these public goods, government has to mobilize resources, has to find ways to determine the governing rules and regulations in the society, and has to have mechanisms for enforcement. And every manner of political institution has been developed in history, from top-down single individuals with complete power to attempts to make these rules in a collective and shared manner through an open participatory democracy in which each adult citizen, or very typically an adult property-owning man, has the share of responsibility in jointly settling the rules. And it is through constant change, often driven by environmental shocks, driven by threats from abroad, or driven by new technologies, that the political institutions continue to evolve. So, like all aspects of society, environmental change and technological change give rise to institutional change of politics, but also ideas about politics give rise to social change, which indeed can then trigger other kinds of changes, including environmental change and including, in fact, technological changes as well. We can say that political institutions have been invented and reinvented constantly over time. We can look back to the first empires, especially along the Nile River Delta, or the dynasties of China, or the rivers of Mesopotamia, the Tigris and the Euphrates, including the Assyrian Empire with its capital at Nineveh, along the Mesopotamian rivers and constituting the first imperial city-states of our history, and in this case of the classical age. We can think of the birth of democracy in ancient Athens, in 5th century Athens, and the golden age of that democracy in the age of Pericles, the democratic leader and statesman of Athens in the middle of the 5th century. And in this case, the Athenians would meet together on the Areopagus at the base of the Acropolis to debate their cases, to hold judicial proceedings, as well as to make choices for the society. A century after the age of Pericles, and after the Peloponnesian Wars from 431 BCE to 404 BCE, came the great philosophers of the 4th century BCE in ancient Greece, Socrates, and then his student Plato, and then his student Aristotle, who began to study intensively the political institutions that had formed and that were still evolving. And one of the most brilliant essays ever written about political institutions, in fact, inventing political science in the Western world, is Aristotle's great book, The Politics. And in that book, Aristotle talks about different institutional forms for power. He talks about governments of the one, the few, and the many. The governments of the one is one ruler. And he distinguishes among these different types, the one, the few, and the many, good forms of government and bad forms of government. For example, a wise monarch is good government of the one, but a tyrant or despot is a bad government of the one. Or there can be a good form of government of the few, an aristocracy, which means literally in the Greek root, governance of the best. Or it could be an oligarchy, a few gangsters which rule the society. So government of the few can be of a good outcome or a bad outcome. And government of the many can be, on the one side, a republic in which individuals have virtuous ideas about the common good of the society, or it can be a mob, which rules as a mob, perhaps taking away the property and even depriving groups of their lives in mob rule. Well, Aristotle's genius was both to define the range of political institutions and to observe that some met the human needs of their societies and others were adverse to the good life. And by studying the range of political institutions and their possible outcomes, Aristotle invented a new science of politics, what we call political science. And since Aristotle's writings more than 2,300 years ago, we continue to turn back to Aristotle's The Politics and all that has followed to examine the question of political institutions and how they evolve and how they should be structured to meet the needs of society.